1965, the horsepower war was completely out of control, and that was great news for buyers, because while many fast cars today tend to feel similar, in 1965, every manufacturer had its own way of chasing performance. Some relied on massive V8 engines, others focused on lighter cars, and a few created machines so extreme that they barely seemed street legal. And honestly, some of the cars you're about to see would still surprise plenty of modern drivers. Let's begin. 1965, Pontiac GTO Tri-Power. This car didn't look like the fastest machine in America, but it helped create the horsepower war that would define an entire generation. And that's exactly what makes the 1965 Pontiac GTO so special. Because while many manufacturers were still building relatively tame family cars, Pontiac had a different idea. Take a mid-size coupe, install a massive V8, and see what happens. The result was spectacular. At first glance, the GTO looked elegant and relatively restrained compared to the muscle cars that would arrive a few years later. But under the hood was something far more serious. The Tri-Power version used a 389 cubic inch V8 equipped with 3 two-barrel carburetors, a setup that pushed output to 360 horsepower. And in 1965, that was a huge number. Thanks to its combination of weight, torque, and power, it could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.5 seconds. An impressive figure for a production American car of the era. And that contrast was exactly what surprised so many people. Because it looked like an elegant everyday coupe, yet it was capable of outrunning cars that seemed far more exotic. It's no coincidence that many historians consider the GTO one of the cars that launched the golden age of the muscle car. Today, the best Tri-Power examples can easily exceed $80,000. And more than half a century later, it remains one of the most important, influential, and fastest American cars of 1965. 1965, Shelby GT350. Oh, this car didn't look like a muscle car. And that's exactly why it was so dangerous, because while many manufacturers pursued speed by installing larger and larger engines, Carroll Shelby chose a completely different path: less weight, more balance, and race-inspired tuning. The result was the GT350, a car that transformed the young Ford Mustang into a genuine high-performance machine. At first glance, it looked much smaller than most of the cars on this list, but don't let that fool you. Under the hood sat a Hypo 289 V8 producing around 306 horsepower, a very respectable figure for a car that weighed considerably less than many of its rivals. And this is where things get really interesting, because the GT350 didn't rely solely on horsepower. Its real weapon was the combination of power, weight, and handling. Thanks to that formula, it could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.3 seconds, a time that placed it among the fastest American cars of 1965. And that contrast is exactly what caused so many drivers to underestimate it. Because while other cars impressed people with giant engines and massive dimensions, the Shelby simply focused on winning. It's no surprise that it quickly became a benchmark both on the street and on the racetrack. It was quick in a straight line, but it could also attack corners in a way that many muscle cars of the era simply couldn't match. Today, the best original examples can easily exceed $300,000 at auction. 1965 Plymouth Belvedere. This car looked like a fairly ordinary sedan. And that was exactly what made it so terrifying, because at first glance the Belvedere didn't look like a machine built to dominate drag strips. It didn't have exotic styling. It didn't have an especially aggressive appearance, but under the hood lurked one of the most legendary engines in American automotive history, the famous 426 Hemi. And this is where everything changes. While many cars of the era tried to impress with big horsepower numbers, the Hemi simply rewrote the rules of the game. Officially, it produced 425 horsepower, but many experts believe the real figure was considerably higher, and in 1965, that was absolutely insane, especially in a car that still looked relatively understated. The result was brutal acceleration. It could reach 60 miles per hour in approximately 5.5 seconds, a figure that remains impressive even today. And that contrast is exactly what makes it one of the most fascinating cars on this list, because it looked like just another American family car. But it was capable of defeating almost anything lined up beside it, at a stoplight or on a drag strip. Today, original examples equipped with the 426 Hemi can easily exceed $200,000. And before we continue, I want to know something. Of all the cars we've seen so far, which one would you choose for a race? The balanced Shelby GT350, the revolutionary Pontiac GTO, or this brutal Plymouth Belvedere 426 Hemi? Let me know in the comments. 1965 Chevrolet Impala SS. This car was huge, and that's exactly why so many people underestimated its speed. Because when most people saw an Impala SS in 1965, they saw a comfortable American coupe built for long-distance cruising. They didn't expect to be looking at one of the fastest cars in the country. But this is where things get interesting. Under the hood was Chevrolet's legendary 409 V8, an engine that had already earned a fearsome reputation among performance enthusiasts. In its most powerful form, it produced up to 425 horsepower, and that completely transformed the character of the car. Because the Impala wasn't small, it wasn't light, and it certainly didn't look like a sports car, yet it could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6 seconds, a time that placed it among the fastest American cars of 1965. And that contrast is exactly what makes this car so special. Because while other performance models tried to look aggressive, the Impala retained much of its elegance and comfort. It was a true American Grand Tourer. It's no coincidence that the SS 409 became one of the most desirable Chevrolets of the 1960s. Today, the best examples equipped with the 409 can easily exceed $100,000. And more than half a century later, it remains one of the greatest examples of how a huge automobile could also be incredibly fast. 1965, Ford Galaxie 500. This car looked far too big to be this fast, and yet, it was one of the most feared automobiles in America in 1965. Because while many manufacturers were discovering the potential of mid-size muscle cars, Ford continued proving that a full-size car could also be brutally quick. At first glance, the Galaxie looked like an elegant highway cruiser, long, comfortable, and built to cover hundreds of miles with ease. But that image changed completely when you lifted the hood, because sitting there was the legendary 427 V8, one of the most famous engines Ford ever produced. Depending on the configuration, it delivered up to 425 horsepower, a figure that placed it among the most powerful cars available to the public in 1965. And this is where the contrast that makes this car so fascinating begins, because nothing about its massive dimensions suggested that kind of performance. Yet it could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 5.8 seconds, an impressive number for such a large and heavy automobile. And that was exactly what surprised so many people. It's no coincidence that the 427 became a legend both on the street and in NASCAR. It was an engine built for one thing: speed, and the Galaxie was one of the greatest demonstrations of its potential. Today, authentic 427 equipped examples are among the most desirable Fords of the 1960s, with values that can easily exceed $150,000. 1965 Shelby Cobra. This car didn't look like a street car. It looked like a race car that somehow ended up with license plates. And that was exactly what made it so terrifying. Because while most of the cars on this list still attempted to balance comfort, practicality, and performance, the Shelby Cobra had a much simpler mission: be as fast as possible, and very few American machines in 1965 could come close to it. At first glance, it was tiny, much smaller than an Impala, much smaller than a Galaxie, but beneath that lightweight body was an absolute monster. The legendary 427 cubic inch Ford V8, an engine capable of producing around 425 horsepower. And this is where things become completely absurd, because all that power had to move a car weighing just over 2,200 pounds. The result was explosive. The Cobra could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 4.2 seconds, an extraordinary figure even by modern sports car standards. and that made it one of the fastest American cars money could buy in 1965. The driving experience was equally intimidating. The short wheelbase, the massive torque, the raw, unfiltered character. Everything about the Cobra felt wild. It wasn't a car that tolerated mistakes. It was a car that demanded respect. And that's exactly why it became a legend. Today, original Cobra 427s rank among the most valuable American automobiles in the world, with examples easily selling for several $1,000,000. And now, I want to know something. Of all the cars we've seen so far, which one would you choose for a race? The brutal Plymouth Hemi, the massive Galaxie 427, or this wild Shelby Cobra 427? Let me know in the comments. 1965, Dodge Coronet. Some cars were fast. This car was a warning, because while many manufacturers were still trying to find the balance between comfort and performance, Dodge decided to go in a different direction. More power, more aggression, fewer compromises. And this was the perfect example. At first glance, it was still a relatively elegant coupe by the standards of the era, but it carried a far more intimidating presence than many of its rivals. It looked like a car looking for trouble, and it usually found it. Under the hood sat the legendary 426 Hemi. Officially, it produced 425 horsepower. But what really mattered was how it delivered that power. The Coronet didn't accelerate in a refined manner. It hit, it shoved, and it made it very clear that it had been designed for one mission: to be faster than whatever car happened to be beside it. The result was impressive. The sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour could be accomplished in approximately 5.4 seconds, a figure that placed the Coronet among the fastest American automobiles available in 1965. And here's the interesting contrast, because despite being brutally quick, it still offered 4 seats, a generous trunk, and all the practicality of a large American coupe. It was a car capable of carrying the family during the week and humiliating rivals on the weekend. It's no coincidence that the Hemi models quickly became legends. They represented the exact moment when America's horsepower war started to spiral completely out of control. Today, the best examples can easily exceed $200,000. 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu SS. This car looked far too elegant to belong on a list of the fastest cars. And that's exactly why it surprised so many people. Because when it arrived on the market, Chevrolet achieved something very difficult. It combined the appearance of a refined midsize coupe with the heart of a true muscle car. At first glance, the car looked clean and balanced. It wasn't as intimidating as some of its rivals. It didn't look like a machine built exclusively for racing, but under the hood, the story was very different. There sat the massive 396 big block V8. In its most powerful version, it produced up to 375 horsepower. But this is where things get interesting, because the Chevelle didn't rely solely on brute force. It also benefited from an excellent balance of size, weight, and performance. As a result, it could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 6 seconds. And that was exactly what made it so dangerous. Because it didn't attract attention like a Cobra, it didn't seem as radical as a Hemi-powered machine. But when it came time to accelerate, it proved it could compete with almost anyone. That balance was precisely one of the reasons why the SS 396 became one of the most successful muscle cars of the entire decade. It was powerful enough to satisfy performance enthusiasts, comfortable enough for everyday driving, and stylish enough to appeal to buyers who wanted more than just raw speed. Today, the best examples equipped with the genuine 396 big block can easily exceed $100,000. 1965, Oldsmobile 442. This car shouldn't have been this fast, and that's exactly why it became a legend, because while names like GTO, Cobra, and Hemi grabbed most of the attention, Oldsmobile was quietly building one of the most capable performance cars of 1965, and many people simply never saw it coming. The 442 looked like an elegant midsize American coupe, refined, well-proportioned, and far more understated than some of its rivals. But beneath that relatively conservative appearance was something entirely different. The famous 400 cubic inch Rocket V8, an engine producing around 345 horsepower. The number may not have sounded as impressive as some of the monsters we've seen on this list. But here's the important detail. The 442 used that power with remarkable efficiency. As a result, it could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 6 seconds, a figure that placed it alongside some of the fastest cars in America in 1965. And that was exactly what surprised so many people. Because the Oldsmobile didn't try to look like a race car. It didn't need giant hood scoops. It didn't need an aggressive image. It was simply fast, very fast. And perhaps that made it even more dangerous. Because while everyone was watching the GTOs and the Hemis, the 442 was quietly proving that Oldsmobile knew exactly how to build a serious performance machine. Today, the best examples of the 442 can easily exceed $80,000 depending on condition and originality. And when you look at all of these cars together, it becomes easy to understand why 1965 was one of the most important years in American performance history. Because it was no longer just about building fast cars. It was about building the fastest car. Every manufacturer wanted to dominate. Every brand wanted bragging rights. And the result was one of the greatest horsepower wars the automotive world has ever seen. Now, I want to know your opinion. Of all the cars we saw today, which one do you think was the most impressive? The revolutionary Pontiac GTO Tri-Power, the wild Shelby Cobra 427, or one of the monstrous Hemi-powered machines from Dodge and Plymouth? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through the fastest American cars of 1965, don't miss the video appearing on your screen right now. Because there, we go back 1 year to discover the fastest American cars of 1964. And trust me, some of the machines on that list were responsible for starting this incredible horsepower war in the first place. See you in the next video.